And this morning on the Ag Issues program, a pleasure as always to bring on to the program Roger McEowen, professor of agricultural law and taxation at the Washburn University School of Law, as he joins us on the program this morning. Roger, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Greg. Just fine, thank you.
Well, let's get to it. And this, of course, took place on Friday. Congress, clear up, I think, to the midnight deadline, did pass H.R. 6363, known as the Further Continuing Appropriations and Other Extensions Act of 2024. That was signed into law. Basically, it's the kick the can down the road on the continuing resolution that will extend federal funding at current levels through March 14th. But what we want to focus in on today is the ag provisions, some important ag provisions that were contained in this.
Right, Greg. And as listeners will remember, this is a much slimmed down bill. It's slightly over 100 pages compared to the almost 1,500 page, what I call a porculus bill that was initially proposed. And of course, Trump and Elon Musk got on top of that pretty quickly and got it changed. So now we have something. I doubt if we've ever had it in American history. We have a president signing a bill largely shaped by the incoming president. I find that a bit ironic, but at least they got a whole bunch of what I would consider garbage out of there and got it down to pretty much the essentials. So we'll keep basically continuing funding up through the middle of March, let the new administration deal with it, and then put in additional funding for disaster relief and extension of the Farm Bill and certain type of assistance, immediate assistance for farmers and livestock producers. So that's where we're at. And you're right, there are numerous key provisions related to ag that's in the bill.
Well, let's first talk about the disaster relief, and that is for towards what we saw with Helene and Milton, the hurricanes that fell there. But there are some of that money that's going to go into that will be for ag producers too.
That's true. Of approximately $110 billion in disaster-related aid, there are specific allocations to the ag sector, and that includes $21 billion designated for ag disaster assistance. Included in that is $2 billion specifically for livestock producers, and then another $10 billion designated for economic aid to farmers. So about $31 billion in total. The one for crop producers is designed to ensure that they have access to necessary credit and resources to continue operations currently. Now, I addressed the North Dakota Bankers Association at their annual meeting in early October, and that was definitely a concern of them. The Farm Bill had just recently lapsed at that point in time, and so it created a lot of uncertainty with respect to lending practices and borrowing and lending for farmers moving forward. That's one thing that they needed to kind of give some certainty to the lenders, because then we could have devolved into something more similar to the farm debt crisis in the 1980s with that uncertainty behind what was happening. So this will help with respect to that, and it'll provide an ability for lenders to have some additional surety that they're going to get repaid, even though commodity prices are pretty tough for a lot of the producers.
Yeah, and we had seen some formulas specific for some crops out there, and I'm sure, I assume most of those details were worked out on if your corn, beans, whatever the case may be, as to what that formula is going to be?
Well, we think they'll just continue the current formulas that are there, but we don't know for sure with respect to this new funding. I would anticipate that is what will happen. They'll use the current formulas for determining eligibility and amount of payment that we currently have, but we'll have to wait to see what the rules are when those come out.
Another thing, obviously, that took place with that, as far as the ag provisions are concerned, specifically would be that we do have a one-year extension of the 2018 Farm Bill.
That's right. It gets us through this fiscal year, so we come back to the end of September. And that budget, just to remind people when we talk about a farm bill, historically the farm bill's budget has been allocated about 76% to nutritional assistance or SNAP programs, what we would call welfare payments, about 7% to conservation programs, about 7% to commodity programs, 9% to crop insurance, and about 1% to miscellaneous other stuff. But what it does is continue various ag programs, including the farm support initiatives and conservation efforts, and all of those breakdowns by the way that they have been handled in the past. So we're just continuing forward. So the idea of that is, again, provide some type of stability and certainty to farmers and ranchers and land stewards, allows them then to plan and operate without the disruption that would have occurred if those programs had lapsed. One of the other things, Greg, to go back to my North Dakota presentation, when the Farm Bill had lapsed, I played around with some numbers just to show the lenders if Congress did not extend the Farm Bill, if they hadn't gotten this done and we get into the next crop season, then with respect to commodity programs, we go back to the 1910 to 1924 parity pricing. And when you look at that, I put the numbers up on the screen. The base price for wheat would have been over $16. And the lenders got a big smile on their face that, wow, now my farmers could repay their loans because corn and soybeans and wheat and parity prices, they go way up. And so I kind of mentioned to the crowd then, I said, well, I think that's sufficient enough incentive right there for the Congress to get their job done. They're not going to let that happen. But lenders would have been happy. Their clients would have been flush with money and would be able to repay loans and borrow more. But of course, Congress didn't let that happen. We're just going to continue the existing Farm Bill for another year.
Of course, the interesting part of all this is now that it's extended for another year, but when can they get to it, knowing that the tax law, which expires at the end of 2025, is, I would assume, going to take a higher priority than trying to get the new Farm Bill done?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you remember, I think it was the last time or time before last that I was on with you, I kind of broke down what I thought would happen in the lame duck session. And I had initially put on there Farm Bill extension as must pass. Then I kicked it to unlikely. Hey, they got this done in the lame duck. And so I think your intuition here is probably correct. It now goes to the back burner, and other things will take precedence. Energy, tax issues. Now, the tax issues are big, very big, because there are a whole host of things, if they are not extended or made permanent after the end of 2025, will result in a major tax increase for just about everybody. Particularly the highest percentage rate increase would be for those making right now between about $24,000 and $94,000. You're going to get hit. They're going to get a 25% rate bracket increase if Congress does nothing. Now, given the makeup of what happened in the election, that looks very, very unlikely that would happen. However, there's something that happened in this continuing resolution that is problematic, and many people will probably recall that President Trump was pushing for a removal of the debt limit for him to come in. The reason that is done, and that would have been absolutely critical to have that done, is because of the really strange and I think just inaccurate scoring rules that the Congress uses when it comes to tax policy. And this is a real problem because what you have is you have certain rules that come into play. They look at a 10-year window in terms of budgetary effects, and they end up scoring tax cuts as a revenue loser. The problem with that is it's not true. When you look at the Trump tax cuts for fiscal year 2018, which was the first year when the TCJA, the Trump tax cuts, were in effect, federal revenues were $3.33 trillion. For fiscal year 2023, federal revenues were $4.44 trillion, a third higher. So revenues have gone up to the federal government while the Trump tax cuts have been in effect, and they've gone up significantly. Now, the deficit has increased, but that's not as a result of tax policy. Revenue has gone up. The problem is Congress outspends the increase in the revenue. And that has nothing to do, the fact that the deficit's gone up, that has absolutely nothing to do with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. It has everything to do with spending. And a lot of that, the vast majority of that, goes back to the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 that just blew the budget to smithereens. So this premise that tax cuts result in revenue loss, that is simply incorrect. The revenue estimates, and this is why Trump was pushing for the removal of that debt ceiling. The revenue estimates are all based on budget gains and static revenue effects. They don't look at the dynamic effects. When you reduce somebody's taxes or a business's taxes, they respond in accordance with that, and you generate more business, which generates more tax revenue, which is what happened when we saw revenues go from $3.33 trillion to $4.44 under the Trump tax cuts. But they don't score things that way in Congress. They just look at static numbers. So we're going to cut taxes. That's an automatic cut in revenue. That's not the way the world works. And again, they're not factoring in what would happen with respect to tariffs either. But the games that go on due to that 10-year window, which is known as the Byrd Rule, and the 10-year window sunsetting, and all of that nonsense, in my view, should not become the guidepost of tax policy, because the fact remains that the TCJA has triggered a significant increase in federal revenue. So I know this all gets kind of lost in the weeds when you talk about increasing the debt limit, and in general, that sounds bad. No, we don't want to increase the debt limit. But Congress plays games with that. And they'll play games with that and make it very, very difficult for Trump to get the tax proposals through to extend TCJA, which has been a revenue winner for the federal government. It's weird the way they do it. I wish they would change the rules. I wish they would get away from static scoring of all this and eliminate that from the guidepost of tax policy. But that's where we're at on this, and that's why Trump was pushing so hard for that. But that did not make it into the continuing resolution.
One other thing before we go to the break, another thing that was taken out of the original continuing resolution was the ability to outsell E15 nationwide year-round, too.
Yeah, that's true. And really, I think I said this all summer in my seminars and for the past year, that should have been the focus of the ethanol industry all along, as getting E15 year-round sales rather than focusing on this, which is currently the 40B credit, which is going to change to 45Z next week, because that doesn't work. The current way that they measure carbon reduction is unworkable. IRS has said it doesn't work. I'm not sure the incoming administration's even going to back the 45Z credit. It's an absolute mess, the way that is. And their efforts should have been all along more focused on E15 rather than 45Z and sustainable aviation fuel. The aviation industry doesn't even want that. And what's going to happen when you look at the credits, they're really incentivizing sustainable aviation fuel with much larger credits than what will be for traditional renewable fuels. That's going to hit starting next week. And they're not ready for it because the models don't work and IRS has not approved anything yet. So that is kind of a real mess. But the inability to sell E15 year-round, my view always has been that should have really been the hard push for that industry, but they didn't do that.
Roger McEowen, professor of agricultural law and taxation at the Washburn University School of Law, is joining us on the program. Roger, another piece of legislation that was passed dealt with a perceived inequity in the Social Security system.
Well, a perceived inequity by some. This is viewed as what they've done is viewed as a problem by some of us, including me. I'm not, both of our Kansas senators voted for this, and I don't want to cast aspersions or question them until I have a chance to talk personally to them as to why they voted the way they did. I'll tell you, both of the Iowa senators voted against it, which I find unique dichotomy there. They're all Republicans. You had the two in Iowa that voted against it, the two in Kansas that voted for it. What it does basically, and I know we're running short on time here, so let me try to summarize this real quick, is they brought into the Social Security system fully some public employees that had that were working in states that either opted out of Social Security or otherwise had a private or had a pension through their employer. So Congress had always thought, okay, these people are taken care of. They don't need to be fully, they don't need to qualify for full benefits under the Social Security system. They can get some, but they can't get full because they are covered under a state or federal program that provides a pension for them. Those people have now been brought in. The problem this creates is that it brings in about 3 million public service retirees to get full Social Security benefits. And now this is saying we're having another government agency saying this will pull the insolvency date of Social Security about 6 months to a year forward, and it's going to cost $190 to $200 billion to do this. The problem you've got here is, and I'm going to have to go back, what I was doing in my seminars throughout this past year, I had a segment in there on some of these events of detailed analysis of what goes into what should go into the computation of the determination of when you should start taking Social Security benefits. And this is going to change that. And I'm thinking you may want to start earlier now than you thought, because they're basically defunding the back end of this thing. They're pulling, in essence, benefits forward, adding people in, which harms the system overall, creates an earlier onset of insolvency, and the projection is it'll cost families that retire in about 8 to 10 years about $25,000, and for younger people over their lives, it'll cost them up to $400,000 in lost benefits. There's your problem right there. So this makes it very, very important that the Trump proposal that Social Security benefits return to their non-taxable status, which is where we were about 40 years ago. Social Security benefits were not taxed. Now we're at a situation where a portion of your Social Security benefits could be taxed at up to 85%. And the fact that they didn't increase the debt limit or remove the debt limit makes Trump's ability to accomplish that much more difficult because of those really weird scoring rules that they have in the Congress. So there's a whole lot of things that are intertwined into all of this, which creates some problems that the new Congress is going to have to deal with.
And so this is it just adds another layer, it sounds like, to unwind what that situation is. And like you said, it's for the new Congress now. That's a good way to put it. This is a whole ball of wax that they're going to have to deal with numerous issues that are all tangled together here because of what happened just the past few days. All right, Roger, we're out of time. But as always, if people want to learn more, they can follow you on your blog.
That's true, as well as Ag Manager over at K-State.
All right, sounds good. Roger, as always, appreciate it. And to you and your family, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and we'll talk to you into the new year, 2025.
Thank you, Greg, and a Merry Christmas to you and your family and all the listeners.
That is Roger McEowen, Professor of Agricultural Law and Taxation at the Washburn University School of Law, as he joins us on the Ag Issues program this morning here on 580 WIBW.